Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today, we'll do the forecast for October 2021. First, I wanted to say thank you to all of my wonderful Astrology and Magic patrons. If you would like access to these forecasts early before the general public, you can join us at patreon.com/Nina Griffin. You'll also get access to a lot of videos and materials that are not available to the general public. And at the higher tiers, you have access to my Magical Elections document every month. All right, let's get started. This is a very active month astrologically. So just to start with a very quick September retrospective, September was a pretty active and even volatile month for a number of reasons that we'll get back to later. But what we noticed, especially toward the end of the month, if you're watching this as a patron toward the end of September, a lot of the planets that were going to station in October were approaching their stations, and you can see things starting to really slow down at the end of September already as these planets completely station and then change direction. Now, as we speak, Mercury is just about to go retrograde in a couple of days, so I think we're going to be feeling it, and we're going to have that sense of energy shifting directions rather abruptly very, very soon. With October, the first full week, that is the first full calendar week of October, is very busy. It starts off with October 3rd, Mercury retrograde, trining Jupiter retrograde at 22 Libra and Aquarius. Now, this is actually the second trine of 3. The first one was September 20th, and then there is one later in October. So you can think of this as a series or as a play in 3 acts. Now, it's generally harmonious because Mercury and Jupiter are in a trine. But what's interesting about the second trine is that both planets are retrograde. And it's not a particularly punchy combination, partly because it's a trine, so matters tend to be more flowing for good or evil. But also because 2 retrograde planets are involved, sometimes you get that really kind of double whammy of very unexpected events occurring, especially in the field of legal matters, business or politics, as well as education. So things could get a little bit erratic, I would say, October 3rd in all of these fields that have to do with Mercury, that have to do with Jupiter. Now remember that Mercury is in Libra, and Libra is actually a commercial sign. People don't think about it. They usually think of the scales as the scales of justice, but long before scales were associated with justice, they were associated with merchants. So even though it's not, say, an earth sign, which we might associate with material things like commerce, Libra is actually a very commercial sign. And so a lot of things that happen in Libra often have to do with business and commercial events. Now, the same day, October 3rd, Mercury has his evening set at 22 Libra. What this means is that Mercury becomes invisible. He approaches the sun and he sets into the sun's rays. So mercurial concerns such as business, communication, politics, the law, education temporarily go either underground, they become less important. Sometimes there are sort of hidden matters going on in those fields that are hidden from the public view. But more generally, progress in these areas can be hard to achieve during this period because a planet is considered weakened by its proximity to the sun, such that it can no longer be seen due to the sun's glare. Now, October 5th, Saturn begins his 5-day stationary period before turning direct. And if you watched my other video that is available, you can see that all planets have stationary periods. In astrological software, often you'll see that S mark next to a planet that's stationing just for 24 hours. But actually, it's traditional to look at the visual movement or lack of movement of these planets. And for the slower planets like Saturn, like Jupiter, those stationary periods are significantly longer than 24 hours. So for Saturn, when he's turning direct, that's 5 days. So he's going to be turning direct in 5 days. So as early as October 5th, he's really already stationary. And you're going to see that sense of change of direction, that sense of things possibly grinding to a halt, but generally improving, right? Because this is a direct station. I think you're going to see a change in tone around October 5th. Now, also be aware that Saturn will spend really most of October most of November within 1 degree of 8 Aquarius. So if you have any key points in your chart around 8 Aquarius, you're going to feel it because Saturn will have been there most of September as well, so well over 2 months, just in that general 8 Aquarius area. Now, planets turning direct will lead to turning points, right? That's really what it's all about, and especially it's a positive movement, depending on what you consider positive, but there's certainly activity, there's movement, there's a more healthy and flowing expression that's resuming now. Whereas things may have seemed sort of blocked or sort of at a stalemate, now there is a certain blockage that is being removed by Saturn going direct. Of course, we'll have other planets turning direct this month, and so you're going to feel that experience of progressive movement, progressive lightening of burdens that seem to have made the road impassable for a while. Now, also during this first week, we have a new moon at 13 Libra on October 6th. Now, this is a challenging lunation, I'm not going to lie. I think especially for the financial markets, which will definitely see some volatility in the coming 2 weeks. In terms of weather as well, this will bring, I think, unseasonable heat and fires, and the more humid climates will see storms. Now, we have to look at this lunation in context because it's really part of a series of new and full moons that are conjoining or opposing Mars this fall. This started in September and will continue through November, about 3 months total. So this new moon makes the closest aspect to Mars out of all of the lunations in this series, and Mars, of course, is combust here. He is afflicting the Sun because he's Mars, and especially because he's in his detriment, but he's also being afflicted by the Sun because he's proximate to the Sun. The Sun afflicts when you're too close to the king, you are in a zone of danger. Now, this lunation conjoins the fixed star Algorab, which is in the right wing of the Corvus or Crow constellation. And it used to be part of an ancient lunar mansion whose patron was a god called Imdukudku, the great storm bird, or the storm bird of the evil wind. Now, this lunation, I think, will surely bring storms, winds as well as fogs, possibly also smoke because of fires. Now, at times we do see important space and air travel events, occasionally disasters in these fields as well. Certainly, since Mars is involved, there could be some unwelcome news. October 6th, Pluto stations direct at 24 Capricorn. What we see here is really collective movement forward because it's one of the outer planets that's not visible to the naked eye. It's hard to feel this, I think, as an individual, but certainly something on the national or international stage may advance or start moving again after not having moved during the period of Pluto's retrograde motion. The very next day, October 7th, the Sun will conjoin Mars at 15 Libra. Now, this is a fiery combination. Both of these planets are naturally hot and dry and fiery. And again, as with the lunation, these two planets mutually afflict each other. So it's a pretty unpleasant combo. The Sun combusts and obscures the light of Mars, while Mars, in his detriment, harms the Sun. So because both planets here are in signs of their debility, right? The Sun is in his fall and Mars is in detriment. So it's going to be pretty challenging. It's going to manifest, I think, in not the best way. Now, what's interesting is that the Sun and Mars are traveling together in orb, and they have been since late August, and they will continue to do so until about mid-November. Generally, I would say that this period as a whole, not just this day, but really this entire period of the Sun being close to Mars, is not great for people who are placing themselves in that Mars position of aggression or disruption. Combustion is considered the worst affliction that can happen to a planet. So I think that this is as bad or worse for Mars than the ongoing Mars-Saturn square that we saw in late 2020. Politicians, nations, public individuals who play a Mars role of a provocateur or someone who's picking fights, I think have really been feeling this and will continue to do so for some time until the two planets separate by at least 13 degrees, which is the combination of the moiety of their two orbs. Now, that same day, October 7th, Venus enters Sagittarius. It's generally an improvement for Venus because she is leaving the sign of her detriment, Scorpio, and she's now basically merely peregrine in most of Sagittarius without dignity. It's a much more flashy and fiery and combustible placement for Venus. So I think now we're going to get self-expression that's much more outspoken, confrontational, even militaristic. As I always tell people, remember, Sagittarius is the only sign that features a weapon in the zodiac. October 9th, a Mercury retrograde will conjoin that Sun-Mars conjunction at 16 Libra, adding, I would say, more verbal stimulation, more wind, more storms, right? Metaphorically as well as literally. So it's a powerful combo when you have 3 planets like this. And I think that it will certainly lead to some weather changes. It could also lead to some financial shocks or other volatility, because don't forget that this is reflecting some of the same patterns that we saw in the previous lunation, which was the Sun conjunct Mars. So certainly high winds as well as intense talk. They're both on the table. There will be news, I think, around space and flight, but also legal and business combat, as well as education. Once again, Mercury symbolizes students. I do think that last point, we are going to see some kind of culmination of some of the fights around education and schools and what schools do around COVID. I do think that we're going to see some pretty intense activity right around that first full week of October. That was just week 1. Now, week 2 of October, October 10th, Saturn will finally turn direct or station direct at 6 Aquarius. So he's been stationary for 5 days. This is October 10th where he actually makes that change. For those of us who've been feeling like nothing has been moving forward the past 140 days, which is the length of Saturn's retrograde period, we now get some forward motion, right? Even though it's going to be maybe a little slow at first, I challenge you to say that you didn't feel anything changing around October 10th. There is often a very noticeable shift, especially if Saturn happens to be your Lord of the Year or otherwise emphasized for you right now. Building, infrastructure, and other long-lasting structures and plans can now move forward without too many hitches, even if previously progress was like watching paint dry or pushing a string, as we say. October 13th, Jupiter will start his stationary period today. So when Jupiter turns direct, his stationary period is 4 days. Now, Jupiter, like Saturn, is in Aquarius, but of course he is the great benefic. So he's much more about creating structures to improve the lives of a collective. And those kinds of projects, whether they're political, personal, financial, those are going to start moving forward again. I think that public funding will get a push forward around this time. And there is a sense of having come through the lessons of the last 4 months, having learned something about patience and restraint on one's enthusiastic and unbounded tendencies. Remember that Jupiter this year, his movements were very much linked to the CDC's guidance on masks, where they ended up reversing themselves, saying masks are no longer needed. Then they said, yes, you do need them. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit more clarity in that direction. October 15th, the Sun will trine Jupiter retrograde at 22 Libra, 22 Aquarius. You know, there's always a trine between the Sun and Jupiter before Jupiter turns direct. And it represents, in addition to Jupiter's station, a bookend to that previous 120 days, which is the period of Jupiter's retrogradation. So now is really the moment when the Sun trines Jupiter, where we get to reflect on and bring into awareness everything we've learned over the last few months and all the great changes that the last 4 months have brought to us. Now, October 15th, Mercury will rise out of the Sun's beams in the morning as an oriental star, walking before the king, as it were. This will happen at 10 Libra. Now, when a planet rises out of the beams, it's always a very powerful moment for the planet, and it's a great moment in which to push forward mercurial projects. I think we're going to find some kind of way forward for latency-aged children, because that's who Mercury rules. Mercury rules children starting around the age of 5 until about puberty. And so they are going to have some kind of moment of power or empowerment. I don't know if this is when maybe the FDA approves vaccines for kids, right? So that will change a lot of kids' lives as well as their families. The event for a planet that emerges out of the sun's rays is called phasis, or an appearance in Hellenistic terms in ancient Greek. And so I think at this time, we're going to experience new information or new developments that are suddenly going to emerge into the light that may not have been apparent before. Week 3, October 17th, Jupiter will finally station direct at 22 Aquarius. This is the third of 4th planetary stations this month. The speed of events will increase with each of these. Jupiter will spend the next 2 months until mid-November within 1 degree of 22 Aquarius. So if you have any planets or key points around that area, you're going to feel Jupiter's presence for a long time, about those 2 months this fall. I think you will generally get a powerful sense of progress, of movement, and even healing. Certainly it's a great opportunity to get moving on all the things that we have postponed or slow-walked the last 4 months. October 18th, Mars will trine Jupiter at 22 Libra Aquarius. Now remember, Mars is very weakly placed in Libra, the sign of his detriment. But here he is near the fixed star Spica, who's at 24 Libra. And so he gives an impetus here to projects of nourishment, public health, and general restoration of structures and organizations. Mars trine Jupiter could be slightly helpful here. Same day, Mercury will station direct at 10 Libra, and that is the last direct station of the month. We're not even at the end of the month, and we already will have had 4 direct stations. So you can see there's just a powerful intense movement forward this month within really just the first 2-3 weeks. Now, matters are certainly moving forward full speed ahead. There is a fixed star at 10 Libra, the point of Mercury's station, which represents grieving for the loss of what might have been. This could be a fruitful moment, I think, of reflection and acknowledgement of all that has been lost over the last several months. It's also an opportunity to reset in the fields of Mercury, whether it's education, business, law, and so on. October 20th, we have a full moon at 27 Aries, and Mars is the ruler of this lunation. So this lunation opposes Mars at 23 Libra, again on Spica. So there's a real conflict here between what we know is good for us, Mars on Spica, but also a what I call perverse destruction or rejection of those things that can heal and help us. I always think of it as kids sort of having a tantrum before having to go to bed. It's inevitable, it's good for you, you actually really want to do it, but nobody's going to tell you what to do. This is kind of the general vibe of this lunation. Again, the potential for storms and fires is very present, as well as continued market volatility. This time, because Pluto is involved, very big money is going to be involved, big economies, something major, and I think that we will hear big news regarding economic developments, especially out of China around this time. October 21st, Mars will square Pluto at 24 Libra Capricorn. This is an unpleasant combination of violence and excessive power used to oppress. It's certainly a moment for violent repression and autocracy. So I would definitely recommend that you stay safe and take care of yourself. October 22nd, the Sun will enter Scorpio. Now the Sun will finally leave his fall, Libra, and is now merely peregrine, without dignity through much of Scorpio. It's going to change the tone a little bit. It's now going to be more, I would say, underground, more sort of feeling rather than communicative as we're moving into a water sign from an air sign. Now week 4, October 28th, Venus will sextile Jupiter at 22 Sagittarius and Aquarius. It's a soothing balm after the few days that we've experienced, and I think it will help with calming some of the more volatile weather as well as some of the intense economic news. Venus sextile Jupiter can sometimes bring intense rains. So depending on the situation and depending on how this manifests in your location, this could bring a lot of water. Generally, though, it tends to bring milder weather, milder temperatures. It's a more moderating influence. October 30th, the Sun will square Saturn at 7 Scorpio, 7 Aquarius. Now remember, this will activate the Saturn-Uranus square, which is definitely an influence we'll feel intensely the last 2 months of 2021. I do think that in a lot of locations that have already had issues with COVID, those COVID cases will start going up now, similarly to the beginnings of the surge that we saw in the fall of 2020. Hopefully it won't be as bad this year, but it really depends on public health efforts in various locations. It makes sense that as we get into the holiday season, a lot of people are just going to experience a lot more exposures, right? And so Sun squaring Saturn and then later Uranus brings that Saturn-Uranus square back into focus. October 30th, Mars will enter Scorpio, where he goes from his fall into his domicile and all of his minor dignities. So this is a huge power up for Mars. Certainly Marsy people, challengers, now gain significant strength. This may not be the same thing as gaining higher office, because that's often shown by exaltation, but Mars is certainly sitting in the catbird seat now, I would say. Scorpio is also Mars's nocturnal domicile, as it's a yin or a feminine sign, and therefore Mars' force here is hidden and more likely to be subversive rather than overt. Nonetheless, he has a lot of power and a lot of resources on which he can draw. Now, week 5 is partial. It's a partial calendar week, and it's really just October 31st, where Mercury trines Jupiter at 22 Libra, 22 Aquarius. They're both direct this time. So it's the last of their 3 trines. And so we get a sense of some resolution to long-standing legal, educational, and political matters, especially ones that have begun with that first trine at the end of September. Now, I think that this could concern women and the public good, education and infrastructure, certainly public health, because of Mercury's proximity to Spica. So I think we're going to be dealing with rules, decisions about rules having to do with COVID and similar things. So to summarize, Pluto and the 3 classical planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, are all turning direct this month. The latter 3 are all in air signs. So we can expect increased movement, communication, and flow, especially in social and, by extension, business, political, and legal matters. Troubled lunations will continue this month. Again, those new and full moons will all conjoin or oppose Mars. Really, that started September 6th, and then it'll continue through November 19th. We're not really out of the woods on this until the eclipses of early December. So these are, again, mutual afflictions between the Sun and Mars in the lunations, right? So it's going to be tough. It's going to be a sense of a struggle, and it's going to be a sense of 2 approximately evenly matched powers struggling for supremacy. All right, I hope you enjoyed this forecast. If you're not yet a patron, please join up. You can also subscribe to my channel on YouTube to get notified of new videos as they're posted. Thanks very much. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.